Imagine discovering a family secret so dark, it could rewrite everything you thought you knew about history. Two sisters, frozen in time, their youth eternal. But at what terrifying price? Buried documents, vanished witnesses, and a conspiracy that reaches into today's power elite. Stay with me as we unravel a nightmare hidden in the heart of America, one that might still be alive today. It was buried for a reason, sealed behind a wall of New York stone in a conspiracy of silence that held for more than a century and a half. The official records were not just lost, they were meticulously purged. The death certificates were lies. The house on Fifth Avenue, where the unspeakable was born, was demolished under the cover of a winter storm. Each stone carted away and dumped into the black waters of the harbor, as if the city itself were trying to vomit out a poison it could no longer stomach. They wanted it gone, wiped from the ledger of history. But some truths have a pulse. They beat beneath the floorboards of the present. And if you listen closely, you can still hear them. You can still hear the whispers about the Harrington sisters, Amelia and Victoria. In the summer of 1870, they were the darlings of New York society, 16 and 17 years old, celebrated for a beauty so pure it was said to be a kind of divine grace. In the summer of 1895, 25 years later, they were still 16 and 17 years old. Not simply youthful in appearance, but physically, cellularly, unchanged. Not by a week, not by an hour. They never grew older, and the secret of how it wasn't a gift from God. It was a purchase. A terrible transaction made in the shadows with a power that has no name. How does a story this profound, this shattering to our understanding of reality, simply vanish? The answer is more terrifying than the mystery itself, because it means the history you were taught is a fabrication. It means the world you see is a stage and the curtain was never meant to be lifted. This isn't just a story about two girls frozen in time. It's about what was sacrificed to keep them that way. It's about a hidden power that has been shaping your world from the shadows ever since, and you're about to meet it. This story found me, or perhaps I was meant to find it. A heavy sea-worn chest inherited from a distant relative I'd never met. It was supposed to contain old family photographs, silver heirlooms, but hidden beneath a false bottom was a single leather-bound volume, its pages brittle with age, filled with the cramped, frantic handwriting of my great-great-granduncle, a physician named Dr. Elias Thorne. He was a respected man in New York, once a confidant to the city's elite before he was systematically disgraced, declared insane, and left to rot in Bellevue Hospital, where he died without ever speaking another word. His crime wasn't medical malpractice. His crime was that he knew the truth about the Harrington sisters, and he wrote it all down. His journal is a confession. It is a warning, and it is a testament to a truth so monstrous it destroyed him. And as I read it, I can feel it trying to do the same to me. You're not just watching this. You're becoming part of the secret. My ancestors' account doesn't begin with the girls, but with their father, Theodore Harrington, a shipping magnate and industrialist who had bent the city's commerce to his will. A man of iron, of cold calculation, who Thorne describes as being possessed by a terror that dwarfed his ambition, the terror of the ephemeral. He had built an empire of things that last, of steel and stone and gold, but he was haunted by the things that don't. He'd lost a young son to typhoid fever years before, and the loss had hollowed him out, replacing grief with a cold, obsessive need for permanence. He saw the world not as a living thing, but as a collection of assets to be preserved. And his daughters, Amelia and Victoria, they were his most prized assets. Theodore Harrington ruled his house like a tyrant king, and his kingdom was a gilded cage. Amelia the elder had a sharp, curious mind, a fire in her eyes that questioned everything. Victoria was the artist, the dreamer, with a gentleness that seemed almost too fragile for the soot-stained world of 19th century New York. Thorne was their physician, and his early journal entries are filled with a creeping dread. He saw two brilliant young women being suffocated by their father's desperate love. He would cancel their social engagements at the slightest hint of a rainstorm. He forbade them from reading novels he deemed too emotionally taxing. He was trying to protect them not from illness, but from life itself, from the inevitable process of change, of growth, of becoming. Thorne writes, "He does not see daughters. He sees porcelain dolls, and he lives in mortal fear that a single breath of wind will knock them from the shelf. Then, in the fall of 1870, the world outside their cage forced its way in. The Reconstruction era was unfolding, and the city was a place of grim news and quiet desperation. It was in this atmosphere of fear that both sisters contracted a virulent lung fever, a sickness that was sweeping through the city's poorer quarters and turning homes into tombs. Thorne's journal becomes a frantic day-by-day account of their decline. He describes Theodore Harrington as a man unhinged, a captain watching his finest ship sink before his eyes. He refused to accept Thorne's prognosis. He paced the halls for days on end, his eyes wide with a terrifying, sleepless resolve. He was a man, Thorne realized, who would not petition God for a miracle. He would commission one, and he would pay any price. On the 6th night of the fever, when Victoria's breathing had become a shallow whisper and Amelia had fallen into a deep delirium, Theodore Harrington did something that sealed their fate. He dismissed Dr. Thorne. He barred him from the house, claiming to have found a specialist with a more experimental approach. For 4 days, the Harrington mansion was silent. The curtains were drawn. No one came or went. Thorne, consumed by a sense of professional duty and a chilling premonition, waited and watched from the street, but saw nothing. On the morning of the 5th day, he was summoned back. Theodore Harrington met him at the door, his face pale, but his eyes alight with a triumphant manic glee. He led Thorne upstairs to the sisters' chambers. The room, which had been thick with the scent of sickness and decay, was now cold, unnaturally cold. And the sisters, they were not just better, they were perfect. The fever was gone, the flush had returned to their cheeks. Their eyes were clear and bright. They were sitting up in bed, smiling, serene, identical smiles. But it wasn't the blush of health Thorne saw. It was the flawless, inorganic sheen of a freshly painted doll. He writes, "I reached out to touch Amelia's hand and it was cool to the touch. Not the coolness of recovery, but the deep, permanent cold of marble. I had not witnessed a cure. I had witnessed a replacement." Harrington called it a miracle of modern science. He paid Thorne a handsome sum for his silence and his service, but Thorne knew with a certainty that would haunt him for the rest of his life that no science known to man had been practiced in that house. Something else had been invited in, something ancient, something hungry. For the next few years, Thorne tried to forget. He tried to convince himself that he had been mistaken, that a desperate father had simply found a radical new cure. But he couldn't shake the image of the sisters' eyes. There was a stillness there, a placid emptiness that hadn't been there before. Amelia's fire was gone. Victoria's dreams seemed to have vanished. They became once again fixtures of New York society, but they were different. They were performances. Their laughter was a perfectly timed echo. Their conversations were recitations of opinions they had formed years earlier. They were beautiful, charming, and utterly terrifyingly hollow. As time passed, the subtle wrongness became an undeniable grotesquerie. By 1878, 8 years after their recovery, the whispers had started. At first, it was just society gossip whispered behind fans at ballroom dances. Have you noticed the Harrington sisters never seem to change? It's remarkable Theodore must have them on some strict European regimen. A whispered historical rumor from that time recorded in a letter between 2 New York socialites is particularly chilling. To see the Harrington girls is to feel as if one is speaking to a portrait. They are as lovely as the day they were painted and just as silent on any matter of substance. One begins to feel they are not living, but are merely maintained. This casual, cruel observation was closer to the truth than anyone could imagine. Friends from their youth were now married with children of their own, the first lines of care and time etched around their eyes. Not Amelia and Victoria. They remained perfect, 16 and 17, trapped in the amber of their father's terrible miracle. The world was moving on, and they had been left behind, 2 living statues in a museum that was once their home. Thorne, now consumed by his obsession, began a secret investigation. He knew he was risking his reputation, his career, everything, but he could not let it go. He felt responsible, as if his failure to intervene had somehow made him complicit. He used his connections to track down former servants of the Harrington household. Most refused to speak, their silence secured by Theodore Harrington's gold. But he found one, a young governess named Eliza, who had been dismissed shortly after the sister's illness. She was terrified, but she agreed to meet him in a secluded corner of Central Park. She told him about the man who had come to the house during those 4 silent days. He was not a doctor. He arrived late at night in a featureless black carriage. She described him as unnaturally tall and thin, dressed in a simple gray suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. And his eyes, she said, his eyes were like chips of pale glass. He never blinked, not once. He carried a heavy iron-bound case, and he and Harrington had locked themselves in the mansion cellar for an entire night. Eliza said that after the man left, the house was never the same. There was a constant low humming sound from the cellar, a sound you could feel in your bones. And the sisters, after their recovery, they would sometimes just stop. They would be in the middle of a sentence or walking down a hall, and they would freeze for minutes at a time, their eyes vacant as if listening for a command that no one else could hear. It was Eliza's final observation that chilled Thorne to the marrow. She said it felt as if the house itself was breathing slowly, and the girls, they were breathing with it. Eliza's testimony shattered Thorne's last hopes of a rational explanation. The unblinking man, the iron case, the humming from the cellar. This was not medicine. This was a ritual. This was a mechanism. He descended into the city's hidden world, a world that existed in the shadows of the universities and churches. He sought out occultists, back-alley alchemists, and purveyors of forbidden knowledge who catered to the secret desires of the city's elite. His journal from this period reads like a fever dream. He writes of secret societies that met in candle-lit basements discussing philosophies that blended new science with ancient terrifying magic. And he began to hear whispers of a specific group, a cabal of New York's most powerful men, industrialists, judges, financiers, who were bound by a single audacious goal, the complete and total conquest of natural law. They did not have a name, not one they shared with outsiders. Thorne called them the Eternal Alliance. Their objective was not wealth or political power. Those were merely tools. Their true aim was to arrest time, to defeat death, to achieve a permanence for themselves and for what they loved. It sounded like the ravings of madmen, but Thorne was a man of science. He cross-referenced names, shipping manifests, financial ledgers. He discovered that Theodore Harrington and a dozen other powerful men were secretly funding a shell corporation, the New York Esoteric Institute. Publicly, it was a respectable group for philosophical debate. Privately, Thorne was certain it was the engine of their unholy research. They weren't debating metaphysics, they were weaponizing it. And he realized they all shared one thing in common, a history of profound, tragic loss. They were men who had been wounded by mortality, and they were now declaring war on it. By 1880, a full decade had passed. The Harrington sisters were now women in their late 20s, but their bodies, their faces remained those of teenagers. The illusion of youthful vitality had curdled into something monstrous. They were no longer a curiosity. They were a spectacle of dread. They stopped leaving the house entirely. The mansion on Fifth Avenue became a place of dark folklore, a house haunted by 2 living ghosts. Thorne knew he had to see them one last time. He had to know what was happening inside their minds. Posing as a new literary acquisitions agent for the New York Athenaeum, he managed to secure a meeting with Amelia, the elder sister, under the pretense of discussing a donation of books from her father's collection. He describes the encounter in his journal with a heart-wrenching sorrow. He found her in the library, a room where sunlight never seemed to reach. She was as beautiful and as unchanged as he remembered. But when she spoke, the illusion was shattered. Her voice, he wrote, is a perfect recording. She spoke of the upcoming cotillion, an event that had taken place 8 years prior. She recommended a volume of poetry that had been her favorite when she was 16. When I asked her what she hoped for in the future, her smile never wavered. She looked at me with a serene, horrifying emptiness and said, "The future is a settled matter, Mr. Thorne. It is always today." She was not a prisoner in her body. Her body was a prison for a mind that was no longer moving forward. Her consciousness was a phonograph needle stuck in a single groove, playing the same beautiful tragic song over and over again. As he was leaving, her placid mask broke for just a single terrifying second. Her fingers tightened on his arm, her eyes filled with a flash of pure screaming agony. "The song," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "He never lets the song end." She slipped a tiny folded piece of paper into his hand. On it, a crude but clear drawing. A songbird trapped inside a cage made of clock gears. The symbol, a songbird in a clockwork cage. It was not a random doodle. It was a key. It was a desperate message from a drowning consciousness. Thorne dedicated the next year of his life to deciphering it. He neglected his practice, his family, his own health. He spent his days and nights in the dusty, forgotten archives of the city's oldest libraries, searching for a connection between esoteric mechanics and occult ornithology. He found it at last in a banned French text, a 18th century grimoire of what could only be described as biological alchemy. The book was titled Le Chant de l'Éternité, the Song of Eternity. It spoke not of magic, but of resonant stasis. It described a hideous theory that a living organism's biological processes, aging, decay, growth, could be halted by the introduction of a specific sustained sonic frequency, a frequency so complex and unique it could only be produced by another living organism. The book claimed that certain species of birds, if bred and trained under specific conditions, could produce a song that acted as a biological anchor, locking the cells of a nearby subject into a permanent, unchanging state. It wasn't immortality, it was petrification. The process required a constant source of supplemental life energy to maintain the stasis against the relentless pressure of natural law, a donor source which would be slowly, systematically drained to fuel the subject's unnatural permanence. The drawing was a literal diagram. The songbird was the lock. The clockwork was the endless, repeating time it created. The Harrington Sisters were not just frozen. They were the endpoint of a parasitic circuit. Their timelessness was being fed by the stolen time of someone else. Suddenly, the quiet, steady disappearance of vagrants and paupers from New York's Lower East Side took on a terrifying new context. They weren't just missing. They were being consumed. Thorne was now standing on the edge of an abyss, and the truth was staring back at him. The Eternal Alliance was not just a society of grieving men. It was a vampiric enterprise, harvesting human life to fuel their obsession with permanence. This was a machine of flesh and blood and sound. He had to find the power source. He had to find the donor. The clues in Eliza's testimony and the French grimoire pointed to one place, the cellar of the Harrington mansion, the source of the humming. He knew it was madness, he knew it was a death sentence, but he had to see it. He spent weeks observing the house, mapping the guards' patterns, the servants' schedules, and on a moonless night in the dead of winter, he broke in. The house was silent, cold as a tomb. He made his way to the cellar door, picked the lock, and descended into the darkness. The humming was louder here, a low, gut-vibrating thrum. The cellar was not a wine cellar. It had been converted into a laboratory. A strange, gleaming apparatus of brass and copper and glass tubes, filled with a faintly glowing viscous fluid, stood in the center of the room. It was this machine that was humming, and it was connected by a series of thick cables to a sealed iron door at the far end of the cellar. Thorne, his heart threatening to burst from his chest, forced the iron door open. The room inside was small, dark, and contained a horror beyond his darkest imaginings. It was not a donor. It was a boy, or what was left of one. He was strapped to a metal chair, thin tubes running from his arms and the base of his skull into the humming machine. His body was frail, atrophied, but his eyes were open. They were ancient, lucid, and filled with a silent, eternal scream. On a small brass plaque on the chair was a single name: Benjamin Harrington. The son Theodore had claimed died of typhoid fever a decade ago. He hadn't died. He had been repurposed. He was the battery. He was the fuel for his sister's beautiful, empty eternity. The sheer soul-crushing horror of the discovery nearly drove Thorne mad on the spot. This wasn't just a monstrous crime against the poor of New York. This was a father sacrificing his firstborn, his own son, turning him into a living engine of decay to power the preservation of his daughters. Benjamin was the family's dark secret, the withered god in the machine. His slow death was their endless life, The glowing fluid in the tubes. It was his life force, his vitality, being decanted and piped into the rooms above. But how? How was it delivered? Thorne knew he couldn't stay. He had to get out, but he needed proof. He used a syringe to take a sample of the glowing fluid. Then he saw something else on a small table next to the machine. A small silver music box. Driven by an instinct he didn't understand, he took it. He fled the mansion, the cold vial burning against his skin. The terrible image of the boy's eyes burned into his mind forever. Back in the safety of his private laboratory, he examined the fluid under a microscope. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was teeming with microscopic luminous particles that pulsed with a soft rhythmic light. It was life itself, raw and unfiltered. A quote from the French grimoire echoed in his head. The spirit can be distilled, leaving the husk behind. He then opened the silver music box. It didn't play a melody. It emitted a single high-frequency tone, almost too high to hear. It was the carrier wave, the delivery system. The humming in the cellar was the machine extracting the life force. The music boxes, he now suspected there were several hidden in the sisters' rooms, were receivers, converting the piped energy into a resonant field that sustained their stasis. And on the bottom of the box, a tiny inscription, the maker's mark, TH, in partnership with Dr. A. Langford. Who was Dr. A. Langford? The name wasn't in any of his notes on the Eternal Alliance. It was another ghost. A new layer to the conspiracy, suggesting the machine didn't originate with Theodore Harrington. He had a partner. Thorne knew the Alliance would discover his trespass. It was a matter of time. He was in a frantic race to uncover the entire truth before they could silence him. He focused all his efforts on finding the identity of Dr. A. Langford. He called in favors, bribed city clerks, searched university archives. He finally found a mention in a dusty, forgotten scientific journal from the 1860s. Dr. Abigail Langford, a brilliant visionary biologist and physicist years ahead of her time. She had published several controversial papers on cellular resonance and the theoretical possibility of halting the aging process through sonic frequencies. She was a genius, and she had a benefactor, a young industrialist who funded her private research, Theodore Harrington. Then, in 1866, her career came to an abrupt end. A mysterious fire destroyed her laboratory. All of her notes and prototypes were lost. Dr. Langford herself suffered a complete mental breakdown and was quietly committed to a private asylum where she vanished from the historical record. The official story was a tragic accident and a mind that buckled under the strain of its own genius. But Thorne now saw the horrifying truth. Theodore Harrington hadn't been her partner. He had been her predator. He had seen the power in her research, and when he couldn't control her, he destroyed her. He stole her work, had her declared insane, and took her research for himself, twisting its original, likely therapeutic purpose into the monstrous machine he had built in his cellar. The entire unholy enterprise of the Eternal Alliance, their conquest of death, was built on the foundation of a brilliant woman's stolen dream. She was the first victim. Her mind and her work were the first things they consumed. And Thorne knew with a chilling certainty that this secret, the theft of Abigail Langford's genius, was a secret they would kill to protect. He wasn't just exposing a conspiracy. He was exposing the rotten seed from which it had grown. The full picture was now clear, and it was a portrait of an evil so profound and systematic that it defied belief. The Eternal Alliance was not just a secret society. It was an invisible empire with Theodore Harrington as its king. The Harrington Sisters were his crown jewels, the living proof of his power over God and nature. But the technology was used for more than just preservation. Thorne began to find evidence of its other applications. He found records of business rivals who had suddenly, inexplicably lost their competitive fire, their minds seeming to go quiet. He found whispers of political opponents who had been struck by sudden wasting illnesses that baffled their physicians. The Alliance didn't just preserve what they loved, they froze what they feared. It was the perfect weapon, an assassination that left its victim alive but empty. A prison with no bars. Can you imagine that? The power to simply pause a person, to remove a brilliant mind, a dissenting voice from the world without a single drop of blood. The power would be absolute, and Thorne was now their primary target. The shadows around him began to lengthen. He saw the same men in gray coats watching his house. His mail was opened. His patients were quietly encouraged to seek other doctors. He was being methodically isolated, cut off from the world, prepared for disposal. He knew his time was running out. He took his journal, the vial of fluid, and the music box, and he placed them in the false bottom of the sea chest, sending it to his brother's family for safekeeping. His final entry is a desperate whispered plea to the future. They will call me mad. They will paint me as a fiend. They will bury my name under a mountain of lies. But I have seen the boy in the cellar. I have seen the girls behind the glass. The truth is in this book. For God's sake, bind it. Avenge the boy. Avenge his sisters. Avenge Abigail Langford. The end for Dr. Elias Thorne came swiftly. The New York Medical Board, its members counting several of the Eternal Alliance's inner circle, convened an emergency hearing. Colleagues, men he had known for decades, testified to his alarming paranoia and morbid fantasies. They used his own frantic attempts to warn them as evidence of his insanity. He was publicly stripped of his license. His own family, threatened and manipulated by the Alliance, signed the papers for his commitment. He was erased from his own life with surgical precision. He died a decade later in Bellevue Hospital, diagnosed with catatonic schizophrenia. The nurses said he spent his days staring out a window, tracing a single image in the condensation on the glass. A songbird trapped in a cage of gears. And the Harrington Sisters, after Thorne's public disgrace served as a warning to the rest of the city, they were never seen again. The house on Fifth Avenue became a true fortress. Theodore Harrington lived into the 1900s, a phantom in his own home, the sole warden of his perfect ageless prisoners. When he died, his will was executed by a board of trustees, the founding members of the Eternal Alliance. It established a massive perpetual trust for the uninterrupted care of his 3 afflicted children, ensuring that Amelia, Victoria, and the forgotten Benjamin would be maintained in their states, undisturbed for eternity. The house became their tomb, a monument to a secret that had been successfully kept. But the machine in the cellar still needed fuel. The disappearances of New York's forgotten souls did not stop. The withered king still had to be fed his steady diet of stolen lives. If you've come this far, comment the song Never Ends below. You are beginning to understand that the real ghosts are not the dead, but those who are not allowed to die. The story, as far as the public was concerned, reached its fiery conclusion in the winter of 1912. A catastrophic fire, blamed on a faulty gas line, erupted in the Harrington mansion. The blaze was unnaturally intense, consuming the entire structure in less than an hour, the flames reportedly burning with a strange greenish hue. When the smoke cleared, the house was a blackened crater. The official report declared that the 2 reclusive Harrington sisters, Amelia and Victoria, had tragically perished in the fire. Citing the extreme temperature of the inferno, the coroner stated their remains were incinerated beyond recovery. It was a neat, clean end to a strange and whispered about local legend, but in his last, most paranoid writings, Thorne had predicted this. They cannot allow the sisters to exist into the modern age, he wrote. Medicine is advancing. A single examination, a sample of their blood would expose the entire artifice. They are a liability, a loose end from a cruder time. The Alliance will not allow their legacy to, threatened by their first success. They will not dismantle the prison. They will burn it to the ground and call it a tragedy. The fire was no accident. It was a corporate restructuring. The Eternal Alliance was severing its ties with its origins, erasing its most dangerous secret. But there was a detail that the fire marshal, a man named Grant, could never reconcile, a detail he confessed only to his son years later. Despite the inferno, they found no evidence of human remains, no bone fragments, no teeth, nothing. It was as if the sisters had been vaporized. The official explanation was the heat, but Grant had worked dozens of fatal fires. He knew something was always left. The rumor that haunted him for the rest of his life was that the sisters were not in the house when it burned, that the Alliance had simply moved them, put their assets into deep storage. This is where the story bleeds from historical mystery into a living, breathing horror. Because if they weren't destroyed, then they are still out there. This single terrifying question, where did they go, is the beginning of the second chapter of this conspiracy. What do you do with two perfectly preserved women who look like teenagers but are by the turn of the century nearly 60 years old? You cannot kill them. Their unnatural biology may not even allow for it. You cannot release them. You must hide them in a way that is permanent and absolute. Following the fire, the Eternal Alliance began a quiet, brilliant transformation. They shed their gothic, secretive trappings and laundered their identity. They became a series of interlocking foundations, philanthropic trusts, and cutting-edge biomedical research institutes. They moved their power from the backrooms of New York to the boardrooms of Chicago and Washington. Their names are on the cornerstones of universities and hospitals you would recognize today. Their core mission, the conquest of mortality, never wavered. It simply went from being a project of arcane mechanics to one of sterile, corporate-funded genetics. The French grimoire Thorne discovered provided the most horrifying clue. A footnote in the text described a theoretical enhancement to the stasis effect, a way to render it completely dormant, a state the author called l'abîme froid, the cold abyss. Using a combination of chemical agents and a reversed sonic frequency, a subject could be placed into a state of suspended animation so profound they would appear dead by every known medical standard. It was a biological power switch. My belief, the Alliance didn't burn the sisters. They switched them off. They induced the cold abyss. They could be anywhere. Lying in a private cryo-vault in a Rocky Mountain facility, in a forgotten sublevel of a research hospital. Two perfect ageless dolls sleeping through the decades, waiting for their masters to find a reason to wake them up again. The fire was a distraction. The real horror is that the Harrington Sisters may still exist, their impossible youth locked in a silent sleeping state. They are the secret genesis of a power that now holds the entire world in its hands. And what of the engine? Benjamin, the withered king in the cellar. The spectacular fire at the Harrington mansion consumed the city's attention. No one noticed the small, insignificant news item in the paper 2 days later. A minor fire at a private long-term care facility on the outskirts of New York, called the Riverside Haven. The fire was confined to the room of a single unidentified patient who had been a resident for decades. The patient, the report said, died of smoke inhalation. His records conveniently were destroyed in the small blaze. His body was cremated before any next of kin could be located. Dr. Harlan Voss, the director of the Haven and a name that appears in Thorne's notes as a member of the Alliance, retired to a private estate in California a week later. The Alliance was scrubbing its history. With the sisters in their dormant state, the engine was no longer required. The technology had surely evolved. They no longer needed one single tragic boy as a battery. Had they found a more efficient, more scalable way to harvest life force? The 20th century provided a smorgasbord of opportunities. 2 world wars, countless conflicts, mass displacements of populations. For an organization that feeds on human vitality, the chaos of the modern age was not a tragedy. It was a feast. Thorne himself had speculated on this in a chilling passage. What if the conflicts that rend our world are not failures of statecraft, but meticulously managed harvests? What if our collective tragedies are the ecology in which they thrive? This is the true terrifying scope of what he uncovered. It was never just about 2 sisters in New York. It was about a parasitic system of power that feeds on mass human suffering. A system that has woven itself so deeply into the fabric of our world that we mistake its predatory actions for the natural chaos of history. You need to understand the minds of these men, the architects of the Eternal Alliance. They do not see themselves as villains in their own story. They are the heroes. They are the visionaries, the ones brave enough to correct God's flawed design. They see humanity with its brief, messy, emotional lifespan as an imperfect prototype. They believe they are guiding the next stage of evolution. In their worldview, sacrificing the lives of a few or a few million lesser humans to achieve their goal of perfect, unending life is not a crime. It is a righteous, necessary cost of progress. They are beyond good and evil. They have rewritten the rules of morality to suit their own ambition. Thorne saw this with horrifying clarity. To debate ethics with them, he wrote, is like lecturing a storm about the virtue of tranquility. They are a force of nature unto themselves, and they see us as little more than fields of wheat to be harvested. Their true power lies not in their wealth, but in their inhuman patience. They do not plan in years or decades. They plan in centuries. They have created a dynasty of forbidden knowledge, passing the secrets from one generation of their chosen families to the next. The children who inherited their power are now the titans of our modern world. They sit on the boards of media conglomerates, pharmaceutical giants, and tech monopolies. You see their faces on magazine covers. You read their sanitized biographies. You admire their ageless vitality and ruthless success. You think it's the result of good genes and expensive doctors. You don't see the centuries-old machine working in the shadows. You don't see the terrible price that is paid for their longevity. The Harrington Sisters were just the prototype. How many others are there now? What if the real secret to their power isn't just controlling the world's money, but controlling time itself by stealing it from you? Let's not forget the governess Eliza. Her testimony to Thorne was the first stone cast that started the avalanche. After their secret meeting in Central Park, she vanished. Her landlord was told she'd accepted a lucrative position in Paris. Her family received a single typed letter, along with a large sum of money saying she was happy and would not be returning. She was never seen or heard from again, another loose end, neatly and quietly disposed of by the Alliance's efficient machinery. But Eliza was smarter than they knew. Before she met with Thorne, she wrote down everything she had seen in the Harrington house. A full, detailed confession. She sealed it in an envelope and gave it to her parish priest, a man she trusted, telling him to open it only if she disappeared. The priest, Father Michael, was a good man. When Eliza vanished, he read the letter and was overcome with horror. He took it straight to the New York police. An inquiry was opened, and almost immediately it was shut down. Father Michael received a visit from two impeccably dressed gentlemen. They didn't threaten him. They simply explained the reality of the situation. They spoke of the church's reliance on donations from certain prominent families. They spoke of how a hysterical story from a servant girl could cause irreparable harm to the church's reputation. The message was unmistakable. The letter disappeared from the police archives. Father Michael was reassigned to a remote, impoverished parish in upstate New York. The system protected itself flawlessly, but they made one mistake. Before Father Michael left New York, he did something incredibly brave. He sat up all night and copied Eliza's entire letter by hand, and he hid his copy. He sealed it inside the hollowed-out back cover of an old Latin Bible in his new church, and there it remained for 120 years. A silent, sleeping testimony. The letter was discovered in 2018 when the old church was being sold. It confirms every detail of Thorne's journal, but it adds a new surreal and terrifying piece to the puzzle. Eliza saw what the unblinking man brought into the cellar in his iron case. She had crept back downstairs after everyone was asleep, her curiosity overwhelming her fear, and she had peered through the keyhole of the cellar door. It wasn't a strange scientific device, it was an ornate silver cage, and inside the cage was a bird, a small brown songbird, she wrote. Nothing remarkable about it, but when the man opened the cage, it began to sing. And the song, oh God, the song. It was no sound I have ever heard. It made the air shimmer. It made my teeth ache. It was a sound that felt older than the city, older than the stones of the house. This detail, which would have sounded like madness to the police, fits perfectly with the esoteric science of the French grimoire Thorne discovered, Le Chant de l'Éternité, the Song of Eternity. The book spoke of a bioacoustic catalyst, a living key. The complex technology wasn't just mechanical or chemical. It was resonant. It was based on harnessing the unique vibrational properties of a living creature and weaponizing them. Eliza wrote that as the bird sang, the humming from the machine changed pitch, becoming a piercing, high-frequency whine. And the sisters, who she could see lying on cots in the main cellar room, seemed to fall into a sleep so deep it looked like death. When they awoke hours later, they were cured. They were perfect, and they were empty. The bird song was the final switch, a specific biological frequency that locked their cellular state. The implications are staggering. It means the Alliance's power is derived from a science that runs parallel to our own, a shadow science that we would dismiss as impossible as magic. And it means their secrets are hidden not in blueprints or equations, but in the very fabric of the natural world, a world they have learned to twist to their own terrible purposes. Let's return to the sisters, to Amelia and Victoria. What was their experience? Thorne's journal paints a picture of a looping consciousness, a mind stuck on repeat. But Eliza's letter suggests something far worse. It suggests they were aware, trapped, silent passengers in their own unchanging bodies. Imagine it. Imagine watching the world you knew fade away like an old photograph. Watching fashion change, technology advance, friends and loved ones grow old and wither before your eyes, while you remain a perfect, polished relic. It is not a gift. It is the definition of hell, a personalized, eternal torment. There is a chilling quote from the poet Paul Valery that comes to mind. A beautiful thing that is not loved is a monstrous thing. The sisters' beauty, once a source of joy, became their monster. A monstrous mask they could never remove. And behind that mask, two souls were screaming. There is a terrifying hint of this in Thorne's notes about his single desperate attempt to use a spiritualist to contact them. He was a man of science, but he was out of options. He brought the silver music box he had stolen to a respected medium. The woman went into a trance, but she didn't channel the dead. She channeled the living. Two voices entwined, one filled with a cold, sharp rage, the other with a soft, endless weeping. Amelia and Victoria Thorne's transcript is a mess of frantic scribbles, but certain phrases leap out. The mirror is cruel. He wound the clock too tight. The song is a nail driven through our minds. So lonely. We are so lonely in today. And then the most heartbreaking and horrifying line spoken by both voices in a single unified whisper that made the medium collapse in a seizure. Let us rest for God's sake. Let us fall apart. They were begging for the release of decay. They were praying for the salvation of death. This knowledge transforms them from tragic dolls into something more. They were not passive victims. They were conscious prisoners of war. Amelia's note to Thorne, her desperate whisper about the song, was a profound act of rebellion. The drawing she gave him was not just a symbol. It was a schematic of her own prison. She understood the mechanism of her damnation, and she was trying to give him the key. This cast them in a heroic light. They were saboteurs fighting from behind enemy lines in the only way they could. Eliza's letter supports this. She wrote that in the years following their cure, the sisters developed a silent, secret language of gestures and glances. They would have entire complex conversations in crowded rooms without ever uttering a sound right under their father's nose. Eliza thought it was a charming, sisterly eccentricity, but it was a war council. They were keeping their minds sharp, resisting the encroaching stasis, planning, searching for a weakness in their unbreakable cage. This suggests the stasis effect was not absolute. The human will, the spark of consciousness, could fight back. Perhaps the looping mind that Thorne observed was not a symptom of their condition, but a defense mechanism they created, a mental fortress where they could hide memories, keep their true selves alive, and prevent their souls from being completely consumed by the endless empty present. They weren't just waiting for someone to save them, they were trying to engineer their own escape, which leads to the fire of 1912. We have assumed the Alliance set it to erase their mistake. But what if we are wrong? What if the fire was not the Alliance's final act of control, but the sisters' final act of defiance? A desperate, magnificent act of self-destruction. Their only way out was to burn their prison to the ground. If the sisters themselves started the fire, it changes the story from a tragedy into an epic of resistance. They were not just victims, they were soldiers. But this raises a devastating question. Did they succeed, or did the Alliance capture them, pulling them from the flames and forcing them into the cold abyss against their will? The official record is a dead end. But there is one more piece of hidden evidence, the private logbook of Fire Marshal Grant, the man who investigated the blaze. His official report was a clean, concise story of a tragic accident. But his private notes, kept by his family for a century, tell the truth. Grant was a good man, an honest man, and the Harrington fire haunted him. In his notes, he describes finding something in the deepest layer of ash. In the footprint of what was once the mansion's grand library, it was the melted, twisted wreck of a large iron bird cage, the songbird's cage. But inside the wreckage, he found the unmistakable charred remains of a sophisticated clockwork timing mechanism attached to a chemical ignition system. It was an incendiary bomb, a device designed to create a fire of unnatural, all-consuming intensity. Grant knew what it meant. The fire was deliberate. He took his findings to his superiors. He was quietly and firmly told to bury them. The case was closed. He was reminded of his family, of his mortgage, of his pension, and like so many others, he complied. But he kept his notes. He knew the truth. The sisters had set the fire. It was not a suicide. It was a final, desperate battle. They weren't just trying to free themselves. They were trying to destroy the evidence, the research, their own bodies, the very source of the Alliance's power. It was their last stand, a final, magnificent attempt to reclaim their own mortality. And this makes the possibility that they were saved by the Alliance all the more tragic. To fight so bravely, only to be recaptured at the last moment and plunged into a sleep that may never end. So, where are we now? With a conspiracy that has shed its skin and become a modern global behemoth. With a secret that has been kept for over 150 years, and with two sisters, Amelia and Victoria, who are either ash in memory or are sleeping silently in a hidden vault, waiting. The Eternal Alliance in its 21st century form is more powerful than Thorne could have ever dreamed. Their methods are no longer based on humming machines and caged birds. They are based on genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and algorithmic control. They have perfected what began in that New York cellar. They have likely achieved true longevity, a way to reverse the aging process, a cure for death itself, a cure they keep for themselves and their chosen few. Think of the handful of families who seem to dominate the global stage generation after generation. The figures who seem to possess an almost supernatural foresight and resilience. We call them dynasties. We call them visionaries. What if they are simply the original members? Their lives extended by a century of stolen time and perfected science. It's a chilling thought that our bright modern world is secretly being controlled by the same 19th century robber barons who sacrificed children to a machine in a cellar. The Harrington Sisters were the alpha test. Their tragedy was the bloody cornerstone of this invisible empire. And their story, buried for so long, is not a piece of Gothic fiction. It is a warning. It is a glimpse of the real blueprint of our world. You're not supposed to know this, but the past is not dead. It's not even past, and it is hungry. The journal of Elias Thorne is my map. Eliza's letter is my compass. But the final definitive proof of this conspiracy came from the music box, the one Thorne stole from Benjamin's prison. The one with the maker mark, TH, in partnership with Dr. A. Langford. I dedicated years to tracing the lineage of Dr. Abigail Langford. It was almost impossible. Her family history had been scrubbed, her name erased from census records and city directories. But I finally found a single surviving branch of her family tree. A great-grandniece living a quiet life as a university archivist. I went to her. I showed her a photograph I'd found of the music box. She broke down in tears. She told me a secret that had been passed down through the women of her family for generations. A story they were told was just a fanciful, tragic legend. The story of her great-aunt Abigail. She was a genius, yes, but she was also a mother. She had a son named Benjamin, a beautiful, brilliant boy who was afflicted with a rare genetic disorder, a form of progeria, a disease that was causing him to age at a terrifying speed. He would be an old man before he was 20. Abigail Langford's radical, obsessive research into cellular resonance. It wasn't for the good of humanity. It wasn't for fame. It was to save her son. And Theodore Harrington, her benefactor, knew it. He wasn't her partner. He was obsessed with her. When she refused his advances, when she refused to share her breakthrough until it was perfected, he orchestrated her ruin. He had her committed, stole her research, and stole her son. The withered king in the cellar was not Theodore Harrington's son. He was Abigail Langford's. Harrington took the cure she was designing for her dying son and perverted it. He used Benjamin as the power source to grant his own healthy daughters a cursed, empty eternity. This is the original sin. The foundational crime was not just murder and theft. It was the inversion of a mother's love into a tool of monstrous cruelty. This final terrible truth reframes everything. Theodore Harrington was not a grieving father desperate to save his daughters. He was a monster of pathological envy. He coveted Abigail Langford's mind. He coveted her brilliant son. And when he couldn't possess her, he took everything that defined her and twisted it into a monument to his own power. The Harrington sisters were not the objects of his love. They were the symbols of his victory. Living trophies proving that he could conquer nature itself, using the genius of the woman who scorned him. The Eternal Alliance was never a brotherhood of mourners. It was a confederacy of titans, of narcissists who believed their power gave them the right to own the laws of nature. They didn't fear death. They feared irrelevance. They feared the natural humbling cycle of life where the old and powerful must eventually fade and make way for the new. Their entire enterprise was designed to stop that cycle, to create a permanent static world with them as its immortal kings. A world where their daughters would be forever young and their power would be forever absolute. It is the ultimate act of patriarchal tyranny, and it is a pattern that is echoed through the darkest corridors of history. Powerful men so terrified of their own endings that they would consume the world itself to delay them. Dr. Thorne in his asylum cell understood this. He saw that the greatest evils are not committed by demons, but by men who have convinced themselves that their desires are more important than the destiny of the human race. Men who would burn down the world just to see their own reflection in the flames for a moment longer. So why is this story emerging now? Why are these scattered pieces, Thorne's journal, Eliza's letter, Grant's logbook, all surfacing in the same historical moment? I believe it is because the alliance system for all its power is beginning to fray at the edges. A century and a half of secrets is a heavy weight even for them. The very technologies they have nurtured, global communication networks, genetic sequencing, data forensics, are becoming a threat to their secrecy. The digital world remembers everything. The ghosts of their crimes are harder to erase. It is possible a younger generation within the alliance itself, horrified by the sins of their ancestors, is strategically leaking this information. Or perhaps it is something more fundamental. Perhaps the stasis technology is inherently unstable. Perhaps the porcelain dolls in their hidden vault are finally beginning to crack. The laws of the universe can be bent for a time, but they cannot be broken forever. Entropy is patient, and it always collects its debts. There is a principle in physics called discordant resonance. When a stable frequency is held for too long, it can begin to break down, creating chaotic, unpredictable vibrations. What if the life force, the stolen vitality that powers their world, is beginning to go discordant? What if the silent screams of all their victims from Benjamin Langford to the countless forgotten souls are beginning to add up? What if they are creating a psychic vibration that is shaking their perfect orderly system apart from the inside? The story of the Harrington sisters may not be just a secret from the past being uncovered. It may be the first tremor of a coming earthquake, a reckoning that has been building in the shadows for 150 years. I have to believe that the small acts of courage were not in vain. Elias Thorne's desperate record-keeping, Eliza's hidden letter, Father Michael's quiet defiance, Fire Marshal Grant's secret notes. They kept a single tiny spark of the truth alive through a long and starless night. Now that spark has been passed to me, and through me to you. This knowledge is not a passive thing. It is dangerous. It changes you. You can no longer look at the world the same way. You will start to see the architecture of the lie. You will question the inexplicable longevity of certain powerful figures. You will see the hand of the alliance in the strange, violent currents of our times. They will try to bury this story. They will label it a fantasy, a conspiracy theory. They will use their vast media empires to mock it, to discredit it, to drown it in a sea of noise and distraction. They will try to convince you that the world is exactly as it seems. That history is a settled matter. That power is just a matter of luck and ambition. But you will know the truth. You will know about the house on Fifth Avenue. You will know about the withered king. You will know about Abigail Langford, the stolen mother of this dark science. And you will know about Amelia and Victoria, the girls who were loved into a state of damnation. This knowledge is now yours. It is a burden, yes, but it is also a weapon. The only thing an empire of shadows fears is the light. They can murder witnesses and burn down buildings, but they cannot destroy a truth that has taken root in the consciousness of millions. They are ancient and powerful, and few. We are young and mortal, and many. There is one last haunting piece of this story. One loose thread that still keeps me awake at night. The songbird, the living key that locked the sisters into their timeless state. What happened to it? The cage Grant found was empty. According to Eliza's letter, the unblinking man in gray did not kill the bird after the ritual. He carefully placed it back in its silver cage and took it with him. Why? Why keep the key to the prison? The French grimoire offers a final bone-chilling explanation. The bioacoustic catalyst, it says, is unique. Its specific complex harmonic signature is permanently entangled with the subjects it locks, and the process is reversible. The same song that closes the door, the text reads, is the only song that can open it. The Eternal Alliance kept the songbird alive. For over a century, they must have used their unnatural science to preserve it, to extend its life, just as they did the sisters. It was their ultimate fail-safe, their emergency release valve, or perhaps their most cruel psychological tool, the constant unspoken promise of a release they never intended to grant. But I believe the truth is even more terrifying. I believe they kept it because they always intended to use it again. They intend to wake the sisters up. Why now? Perhaps their science has advanced to the point where they can finally fix the flawed consciousness of their original subjects. Perhaps they wish to study them to unlock the secrets of a century and a half of conscious, timeless existence. Or perhaps they have a new public role for Amelia and Victoria to play. Imagine the dawn of their new world order, announced by the presentation of two living, breathing teenage girls from the 1870s. It would be the ultimate demonstration of their power, the final, undeniable proof of their godhood. The return of the Harrington Sisters may not be the end of the conspiracy. It may be the beginning of its public reign. This investigation does not end with a period, but with an ellipsis, a state of dreadful anticipation. We are waiting for the Alliance to play its final card. The story I have told you is not just history. It is a live threat to their existence, and I know they will respond. I have taken my own precautions. Inspired by Dr. Thorne, his journal, Eliza's letter, my entire investigation, it has all been copied and distributed across a decentralized network, set to be released publicly if I am discredited, if I am declared mad, or if I meet with a sudden tragic accident. I will not allow this truth to be orphaned again. But the ultimate safeguard is not some digital dead man switch. It's you, your attention, your memory, your refusal to forget. Every time this story is shared, every time one more person learns the names Amelia and Victoria Harrington, the foundations of their shadow empire tremble. Their power is absolute only as long as it is secret. Our power begins the moment we dare to speak the truth in unison. This has always been the war fought in the dark, the war for the narrative of our reality. And tonight, you have been drafted. You have been shown the enemy. An enemy who sees your life, your vitality, your brief and precious time on this earth as nothing more than a resource to be consumed. But they have made one critical error. They have forgotten the power of the human story, the power of a tragedy that refuses to be forgotten, the power of two sisters who in their final moments of freedom chose to burn. I often return to the vial of glowing fluid that my great-great-granduncle stole from that cellar. It is the last physical relic of the original crime, the distilled life force of Benjamin Langford. It sits in a shielded box in a place no one will ever find. It feels like a cursed object, a concentration of pure suffering. I have been tempted many times to destroy it, but I cannot because it is proof. It is the impossible artifact that validates the impossible story, and it may hold the key to undoing it all. If Abigail Langford's genius could be reverse-engineered from this sample, if her original benevolent purpose could be resurrected from this perversion, perhaps a true cure could be created. Not just for the sisters, but for the disease of power that created their prison. A poetic justice that I think Dr. Thorne would have savored. This is my hope, that this story will be more than a warning. It will be a catalyst. It will inspire a new generation of truth-seekers who will not be silenced. Who will pick up the cold trail that Elias Thorne left behind? Who will dare to shine a light into the darkest corners of power? And who will finally drag the Eternal Alliance out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light of day? The puzzle has 1,000,000 pieces scattered across a century and a half of lies. I have given you the frame. It is up to all of us now to fill it in. Question the timelines, follow the money, and never ever believe that the past is powerless. The ghosts are speaking and it is time for us to listen. What does it mean to be timeless? We chase it. We worship it. We see eternal youth as the ultimate prize. But the story of the Harrington Sisters reveals the truth. To be timeless is to be outside of life. Life is change. Life is the chaotic, painful, beautiful process of becoming and unbecoming. To freeze that process is not to preserve life, but to create a perfect, exquisite mockery of it. The Eternal Alliance in their supreme arrogance did not conquer death. They simply invented a more sophisticated, more agonizing form of it. A living death where the soul is left to decay inside a flawless, unchanging cage of flesh. And in their desperate flight from their own mortality, they became the greatest purveyors of death the world has ever known, consuming generations to fuel their static paradise. They are the true withered things. Their humanity has been eroding for 150 years, leaving only a cold, calculating hunger for more. More time, more life, more control. This is the dark paradox of their power. In their effort to hold on to everything, they lost the one thing that gives life meaning, a soul. And the sisters, whether sleeping or scattered as ash, are the eternal symbols of that sacrifice. They are the human price tag on the dream of immortality. Their story is not just a forgotten horror from the 19th century. It is the story of our world. It is the story of all the beauty, all the potential, and all the humanity that is ground to dust beneath the wheels of absolute power. This is the secret that poisons the root of our civilization, but the poison is losing its potency. The truth is the antidote and it is spreading. In the end, this is a choice of what to believe. You can choose to see this as an elaborate fiction, a dark fantasy woven from the threads of history, or you can choose to see it as a glimpse through the keyhole into the real room where the real decisions are made. But ask yourself this, if a power like this did exist, a power to manipulate life and death, to edit history, to silence dissent with perfect traceless efficiency, wouldn't the world look exactly like this? A world of staggering inequality, of inexplicable violence, of ancient dynasties that never seem to lose their grip. A world where the official story feels like a flimsy and insulting lie. Perhaps the Alliance's greatest achievement was not their secret science, but their ability to convince us all that this broken, predatory world is normal. They have normalized their own monstrosity. They have built a prison and convinced us it is the nature of reality. Dr. Elias Thorne died a broken man, convinced he had failed. He never knew that his journal would survive, that his voice would one day find an audience. But he stood up anyway. He wrote it all down, a final act of faith in a future he would never see. Tonight, we have become that future. We have listened. We have honored his courage. We have heard the silent screams of Benjamin, Amelia, and Victoria. We have spoken the name of Abigail Langford. We have pulled one dark thread from their tapestry of lies and watched it unravel. This knowledge is not comforting. It is a terrible and heavy weight, but it is also a sword. It is the light they cannot extinguish. Use it. My work is not finished. The story is not over. Dr. Thorne's journal contains other names, other clues. The Eternal Alliance was not confined to New York. It was a virus that spread. It has roots in the old money of Philadelphia, in the quiet banking halls of Boston, in every corridor of power across the globe. The Harrington Sisters were the first chapter, but there were others, other experiments, other families who made similar terrible bargains. I will continue to follow the threads. I will not stop until the entire rotten structure is exposed to the light. But this is too vast for one person. It is a war that must be fought by a network, an open-source investigation into our own hidden history. This is my call to you. Do not be a passive audience. Be an investigator. Search your own local archives. Look for the families whose power seems to defy explanation. Look for the records that have been mysteriously sealed, the histories that have been conveniently rewritten. The Alliance left fingerprints, the symbol of the songbird in the clockwork cage. It is their mark. It may be hidden in plain sight in the architecture of an old building, in the corner of a stained glass window, in the logo of a modern corporation. They believe they own our past. They are certain they own our future. It is time to prove them wrong. The truth is not just a weapon. It is our birthright. And it is time to reclaim it. The world you were born into is a lie. But it is not the only world that is possible. The final chilling realization is this. The Alliance's most powerful weapon is not the stasis technology, it's what they learned from it. For decades, they had two conscious human minds trapped in a controlled, unchanging environment. They studied Amelia and Victoria. They learned how memory is formed, how personality can be fragmented, and how human consciousness can be manipulated and contained. The physical prison was just a laboratory for developing the tools of a much larger psychological one. The technology to control the body was step one. The ultimate prize was always the technology to control the mind. And that is the science they have perfected, then deployed on a global scale. It is why our world is drowning in division and distraction. It is why we are so easily fractured into warring tribes, so easily captivated by meaningless spectacles. We are all living inside their grand experiment. The lessons they learned from two sisters in a house in New York are now the operating principles of our global society. They are singing a new kind of song, an electronic digital signal that is broadcast into every home, into every mind. A song of endless looping outrage and empty novelty. A song designed to keep us all in a state of arrested development. The silent, timeless prison built for Amelia and Victoria has been expanded. It now covers the entire world. Now you know. If this tale of eternal youth and hidden horrors left you questioning reality, hit that like button and subscribe for more unearthed mysteries from America's shadowed past. Share your theories in the comments. Do you think the sisters are still out there? Drop The Song Never Ends if you're ready to dig deeper. Stay curious and remember, the truth might just be waiting for you to uncover it.